Recovery with Jesus. Today we're going to share the story of redemption, how my life was rough starting out and turned into a glorified story of the Lord. So I'm going to start my story out as, I was a young kid and growing up in Pennsylvania, and things seemed pretty normal. I was like, Dad had a pretty decent job, and I was just a young kid running around with no cares, and my dad broke his back, and he wasn't allowed to work no more, and things got a little crazy at home, and he started drinking a lot, and that's when the home life got a little out of hand. And then tragedy also hit me when I was 5. One of the neighborhood teenagers had molested me, and changed my life forever. I felt like I was a man had violated me, and I felt like I didn't like to be touched no more. I was very fearful. I was scared for my life, and I didn't tell no one. I never told no one ever in my life till I was 30-some years old. And that was a big weight on my shoulder. And a lot of people asked, like, how come you never said nothing? And it was just an embarrassing moment and shameful. And my biggest advice to you is, if you ever, have been molested as a kid, is to talk about that to someone that you trust, and you can unload that. It's just a big burden to share on you. Things got a little crazy, and then I got into wrestling. Life was good, man. I love to play the sport. I like to be, I got a good place to take my anger out that I had at the world. And, I just liked doing it. I really enjoyed it, and it was a good part of my life. I had great memories doing it. And, things seemed pretty normal, and, they were starting to balance out. And then my family decided to move to New Jersey. That was a little culture shock coming from the mountains of Pennsylvania to New Jersey. I didn't really fit in too much. I was just a mountain boy, poor, not no money. And got in a lot of fights when I came, and fought my way through. And then 7th grade, they started a wrestling team, started wrestling again, and that was fun. And then, 9th grade, things started getting a little crazy. I went to this Halloween party, and I got drunk for the first time, and that was the downfall of my life. I had a job at the time, so I always had money, and I would buy alcohol every day and get drunk to kill the pain. I never thought just by drinking something one time you can get addicted, but I was instantly addicted because it shut off all my emotions and it shut off all the pain. And it was hard, and I continued to drink heavily. And by the time I was 17, I didn't even want a driver's license because I knew I was just going to get in trouble with it. And things kept going on, and I kept getting more drunk, and I couldn't fight the feelings of dealing with being, molested as a kid, dealing with being alcoholic. My home life was a little crazy. My dad drank a lot. And, but I had this personality that, I was kind of popular. And so no one really knew, a lot what was going on at home. I kept it pretty quiet, and no one knew I was ever, sexually abused as a kid. But the more I drank, the less I felt, the pain in my life. And I became an addict probably by 17. I'm probably drinking every day by 15, but I was really shot out by 17. By 19, I couldn't fight it no more. It was my first suicide attempt. They diagnosed me bipolar, and things got really crazy. I started going in and out of hospitals for rehab, and for my alcohol addiction and for the bipolar, because I would never listen to the doctors. I would just take the medicine when I felt like it instead of taking it all the time. I'd drink instead of taking that medicine because they told me I can't do both. So I chose to drink, which was pretty stupid. But by 21, I was so out of control. I got my first DUI. Got OD'd again. I think I OD'd twice by 21. I had 2 nervous breakdowns by 23. Life was just out of control, man. I couldn't reel it in. I would try to get sober, like I knew I had a problem. I would sign myself into rehab, but I just couldn't get clean, man. There's nothing, I get sober maybe 2 months at a time, and that was the best I could do. I couldn't get over that hump. And then, 25 came around, and I still couldn't. I just became worse and worse every day. Things happened. I lost a lot of friends. Like a lot of friends were dying around me, and I just couldn't hold it together. And finally, by 27, I drank so much I couldn't. I started getting seizures. If I would go 6 hours without a drink, I would have a seizure. So I started like waking up in the middle of the night and drinking so I wouldn't have a seizure. Instead of quitting, they told me like, yo, you gotta quit. But I didn't want to hear that. I just kept on drinking. And 27, I had a seizure and I fell 7 feet and landed on my head. And I fractured the back of my skull, and I was bleeding internally. So they had to take off like the right side of my skull and perform emergency brain surgery on me. They induced me in a coma, and I woke up 5.5 weeks later. And it was kind of weird because like I woke up and no one was around me, and there was this Bible on my bed and this book that someone gave me about this girl who got hurt real bad and became a Christian. But I read the book because I was interested in it because she got hurt really bad. And so I wanted, to see how she recovered from that. And I kind of didn't want to read the Bible, so I just kind of tossed that to the side. And when I got out of the hospital, like 3 months later, after I stayed in Christianity Trauma Center, the doc, I finally got to meet my brain surgeon, which I probably met him before, but I was so drugged up on drugs from so much pain I didn't remember. So I remember walking up to him. I'm walking in, I go in his office, and I'm walking down the hallway into his office, and there's like all these magazines hanging up on the wall of all the magazines he's been on the front page. And he was on the front page of Time Magazine, Newsweek, and then all these other ones all the way down. And I'm thinking to myself, that's pretty amazing. You're on the front of Time Magazine. Like, you got to be a really good doctor to pull that one off. So I walk in there, and I said to the doctor, I said, thank you for saving my life. And he looks at me and goes, you need to go home and thank God right now because you're not supposed to be here. I don't even know how you're still here. So I was like, man, how am I going to thank God? Like, what God you want me to thank? I don't know who you want me to thank. So I go home. I get this Bible that this girl bought me. And it was a King James Bible. If you know anything about Bibles, it's probably the hardest Bible you ever could read. And I was like, I couldn't understand it. But I'm grateful for that because I'm a curious-minded person. And it kept me coming back. So I would constantly read his Bible for like 3 years, but I didn't know anyone that went to church or read the Bible or anything like that. So I just continued my whole life. I went to the bars. I didn't drink, but I went to the bar. I hang out, come home, read my Bible, work, read my Bible, work, read the Bible. Then after like 3 years going by, I started, it's one thing like to struggle when you're drunk, because they can be like, oh, I'm an alcoholic. It's just I was a drunk. That's why, that. But when you're struggling when you're sober, then things are just really conflict, So I was struggling and I was sober and I'm trying to get my act together and build this new life being sober, which I didn't even know how to live. My whole life I just drank or was at a party or at a bar or something. And then I started working outside and I got sunburned. I remember thinking, like, this is weird. I worked outside my whole life. I never got sunburned. And then I got sun poison. And I was like, my face started blistering. And, like, it made me sick to be outside. But I had to be outside because that was my job. So I had an hour lunch every day. And I would take this lunch every day. And I would go to this, like, it was so weird because when I got sick, I was like, I got to take a lunch. There was nothing around. I mean, the grocery market went out of business. The Wawa went out of business. You know how bad it is for a Wawa to go out of business? And like, and there was nothing but a Christian bookstore there. So I started going to this Christian bookstore for like an hour a day. And I would go in there and I would just stay in there forever and like talk to the people that owned the place. And I would buy something. And I would get out to my car and I'd throw them back in my back seat and I figured like $10 equivalent was worth me standing there for an hour every day. So I'd buy something for $10 every day. And then I walked through and then I kept going and going and they, I kept building like a relationship with them every day. I went in there every day for like 3 weeks. And then the owner one day was like, hey, where do you go to church? I was like, I don't go to church. He's like, what do you mean you don't go to church? I was like, yeah, I don't go to church. He's like, you want to go to church? I'm like, not really. And so now his mission was to get me to church, but I didn't want to hear about it. I was like, oh, I'm busy. I work. I don't got time to go to church. And then, so I ended up getting so sick I couldn't work. I lost everything. I had no money. Now I'm sober. I'm broke. I have no money. I don't even have money to pay my car insurance. And I look at my sister and I'm like, yo, can I borrow your car? And she was like, where you going? I'm like, church. And she looked at me like, she threw in them keys real fast, right? So I get in the car, I drove to church, and I walk in, and the people I was supposed to meet there, they weren't there. So now I'm embarrassed. Like, I'm walking out, and this guy, he saved my life, man. He stopped me. He was like, yo, you're new here. I see you're new here. And we started talking, and he invited me back in. So I go back in, and I go to church, and I come out, and there's this guy standing there. He's like, what do you think of church? And I was like, I don't know about this forgiveness thing. And he's like, you sure? He's like, he goes, hey, man, did you kill any Christians? I'm like, nah, man. He's like, you sure you didn't kill any Christians? I'm like, pretty positive. He's like, Apostle Paul did, and he was all right, so I think you'll be forgiven. And I was like, oh, man. And I just read that in the Bible, so I understood what he was saying. Apostle Paul was the greatest apostle ever lived, wrote so many books in the Bible, and he used to kill Christians, and God saved him from that misery. And he saved me from my misery, too. So the guy, John, was telling me about Celebrate Recovery. And he's like, yo, we got this thing called CR. And I'm like, yeah, I'm good. And he's like, sure you don't want to go? I'm like, yeah, I don't have a car right now. You know, I'm just like an addict thinking like every way out, I don't want to go. So he's like, hey, I'll pick you up. And I'm like asking where he lives. It's like a 40-minute drive. I'm like, yeah, I'm good, man. He's like, nah, I'll be there Thursday. So he calls me Thursday. I'm like, yo, I ain't going. And he's like, I'll be at your house in 20 minutes. So he comes to my house, walks me through the park, talking about God. I think this guy's crazy, right? But I knew it was serious, right? So next week comes, he calls again, you going? I was like, yeah, I'll go. So I go, this because I knew it would come again to make me walk around the park, so I just went to the recovery program. So I get there, and this is what sold me to Christianity. Like, because, you know, everyone thinks like suit, tie, all that. I mean, look how I dress. I'm definitely not a suit and tie guy, but anyway. So I walk in and Celebrate Recovery, and I hear this. Hi, I'm a believer in the Lord Jesus Christ, and I'm a recovery for alcohol. Hi, I'm a believer in the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm a recovery for anger. Hi, I'm a believer in the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm a recovery for porn. Hi, I'm a believer in the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm a recovery for anger. But what sold me, though, this dude used to talk always about, hi, I'm a believer in the Lord Jesus Christ who survived sexual childhood abuse. I was like, yo, this is my people, man. I can hang out with these church people all day long. So I start going, you know, and like, it just gave me a different view, a different point of the church. You know, we're all broken people. And people think people that go to church are perfect. Yo, we're so far not from perfect, but we know it, right? But, you know, on the outside looking in, you think like, oh, they know it all. It's not true. It's like, we're all sinners. Church is a hospital for sinners. And so I started going to CR, and like, I'm like feeding the homeless. I'm going to Camden. I'm working in the prisons, teaching Celebrate Recovery. I become a Celebrate Recovery leader. I'm doing like all these works. I can work. So like working for Jesus is easy, right? So, you know, like 11 years go by, you know, I'm clean, I'm sober. All of a sudden, my mom gets sick, and she's about to die in 2 months with no warning sign, no nothing. I loved her more than anyone in my life. So now I've been a Christian for 11 years. My mom's about to die. I'm like going back to the bars because that's where I'm comfortable. You know, I'm comfortable in that scene. And I didn't relapse when my mom was alive. And like, you know, my friends did great things. They raised all kinds of money for my mom to support her during her hard time. That was great and wonderful. But, you know, I never had like a tragedy come upon me when I started going to church. You know, it was just all pretty much easy sailing. And I did the total opposite of what I was supposed to do. Instead of running closer to God, I ran as far away as I can. I started smoking weed. I started hanging out with all the old school drinking. Now, I never drank. I never drank the whole time, so I don't know why I said that. But I smoked, and then I just gotten, and I couldn't get my head straight. And my mom died, and it was just a really hard season. And I got back on my feet. My friends gathered around me, got me back on my feet again. I started living with my friend, and then I moved to Pennsylvania for 3 years. In those 3 years, I really poured out trying to get better inside, because life's like, it's like an onion. You got to peel it back, each layer, one layer at a time. And I think God moved me to Pennsylvania so I could literally work on myself for the first time in my life. I went to this ministry called Journey to Joy, and we worked on my issues, childhood abuse, all that kind of stuff, alcoholism, spiritual stuff, physical stuff, worldly stuff. And I just got to really work on my life for 3 years. And it was really a good thing. And came back from Jersey, had 3 beautiful boys, life was good. And just went through some hard times, and now I'm back on my feet again. And it's just great to talk about the Lord, man, and share the gospel of Jesus Christ. The hardest part of being a Christian is really realizing how much of a sinner you really are. Thanks for letting me share my story. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.